Hey guys, today we're sewing the 88 blouse. This top was named after the 88 keys of a piano, echoing the visual rhythm of its symmetrical pleats and layered front construction. A structured yoke anchors the design, while the overlapping front panels create depth and movement, finished with an asymmetric hem for a dynamic silhouette. Featuring a clean square neckline and short sleeves, this top is designed for warm weather and easy layering. For best results, I recommend using lightweight to medium weight woven fabric with soft structure and enough body rather than drapey or overly stiff ones. Fabric requirements and required tools are also listed in the description box below. Let's get started. After pre-washing, drying, and ironing your fabric, cut out your pattern pieces. You will have 14 pieces in total as shown on the diagram. First, we're going to mark our notches. On the wrong side of the yoke, sleeve, and facing pieces, mark the notch areas indicated on the pattern with a fabric marking tool. On the front yoke pattern hem, add an additional marking on the half point. And on the right side of the pleats pieces, mark the notch areas indicated on the pattern. I've marked the notches into two types, A and B, since this pattern has quite a lot of notches. When you transfer the notches onto your fabric, it'll be more helpful if you also mark them in two different colors. FYI, A is for seam matching and B is for making the pleats. Cut lightweight fusible interfacing using the front and back neck facing patterns. Then, fuse it to the wrong side of the neck facing patterns. In this tutorial video, the facing is attached in this way. However, this method of attaching only at the edge is not recommended as the neckline will not stay firm with most summer fabrics, unless you are using a thicker fabric such as lightweight denim. Next, cut 2 cm wide strips of fusible interfacing to match the length of the center back edges of the back yoke pieces. Fuse the strips to the wrong side along the center back edges. We're now going to make our pleats. On your pattern pieces, each pleat has a fold line and a placement line marked with an arrow to indicate which way to fold. You're going to pinch the top and bottom notch of the fold line and align them with the corresponding notches at the arrow head. Pin both edges and repeat for all the other pleats. After you're done pinning, press the entire pleat in place with an iron to secure the folds. Then, sew a row of straight stitches 0.5 cm from the top edge along the red line to temporarily hold the pleats in place. Remove the pins after stitching. The 3 panel pieces will be joined as shown on the diagram. Sew the side seams with the right sides together using a 1 cm seam allowance. Overlock the seam allowances. Press the seam toward the back. The 3 hem pieces will now be joined as shown in the diagram. Match the notches and sew the side seams right sides together using a 1 cm seam allowance. Overlock the seam allowances. Press the seams towards the front. Next, Overlock the inner edges of the facing without trimming. On the wrong side of the hem facing, use a fabric marker or chalk to draw a guideline 1 cm from the outer edge of the center facing hem. This line will serve as a helpful reference when attaching the facing. Next, finish the top edge of the joint pleated panels with a overlock stitch without trimming. Lay the joint pleated bodice flat and open out the pleats at the hem. Then, place the facing pieces right sides together with the bodice, matching the hem edge. Make sure to match the seams of the facing and the bodice before sewing along the hem. Sew along the guideline we drew earlier with a 1 cm seam allowance using a straight stitch. Trim the seam allowance at both corners, cutting across at an angle. Also trim the zigzag hem of the center back pleat at the bottom, leaving only a 1 mm seam allowance, but be careful not to cut through the stitch. This will help the corners turn out sharp and clean when flipped. Flip the facing to the outside and press along the edge for a clean, crisp finish. Top stitch only along the bottom hem, about 0.5 cm from the overlocked edge of the facing. Continue stitching all the way to the side edges. Now that the facing is attached, repress the pleat lines along the hem to reinforce the folds. Since the facing has no pleats, use the existing pleat lines on the main fabric as a guide and press them together with the facing. Press the center edges of the back yoke pieces toward the wrong side by 1 cm. Sew the shoulder seams with right sides together using a 1 cm seam allowance. Overlock the seam allowances. Press the seam allowances toward the back. Now it's time to attach the sleeves to the armholes. As shown in the diagram above, we will match the front and back armhole notches, the sleeve cap to the shoulder seam, and the ends of the armhole and sleeve to align the key points before sewing. Flip the sleeve piece so the wrong side is facing up, then place it over the bodice. Since the sleeve cap and the armhole curves are opposite, first pin the sleeve cap to the shoulder seam. Then, gently ease the armhole of the bodice to match the shape of the sleeve and pin the remaining notches and endpoints in place. Then, pin the rest of the armhole carefully in place and sew with a 1 cm seam allowance using a straight stitch. There's a slight amount of ease at the sleeve cap. When pinning, try to distribute the ease evenly across the cap. When sewing, place the sleeve cap underneath against the feet dogs so the feet dogs will naturally ease the extra fabric without needing to gather it manually. Overlock the seam allowances. Press the seam allowances toward the sleeves. Match the side seams of the sleeves and bodice right sides together, then sew them together in one continuous line with a 1 cm seam allowance. Overlock the seam allowances. Press the seam allowances toward the front. Without trimming, overlock the bottom edge of the joint bodice in one pass with the center back seam allowance opened. Then, prepare the invisible zipper for installation. First, zip the slider all the way up, then mark both sides right above the top of the zipper slider on the wrong side of the zipper. Then, mark both sides of the back bodice 1 cm down from the center back neckline on the folded seam. Align the mark on the center back seam allowance with the corresponding mark on the wrong side of the zipper tape. Then, mark both sides of the zipper at the hem edge. Match the markings on the other side in the same way with the zipper open and temporarily secure the zipper to the bodice seam allowance, approximately at the center of the zipper seam, using a basting stitch. You can do this by hand or with a regular zipper foot, or with a water-soluble stay tape. I will use stay tape here for convenience. If you're using the stitching method, make sure you're only stitching the zipper to the seam allowance and not the outer fabric. Now you're going to switch to an invisible zipper foot on the machine, and sew as close to the zipper teeth as possible. Unfold the center back seam allowance and sew the zipper. As you sew, use your fingers to press and roll the zipper teeth flat. Close the zipper after attaching both sides. At the top, trim the zipper to match the original bodice seam allowance. At the bottom, trim the zipper 2 cm below the point where the bodice ends. Now we'll finish the end of the zipper. Prepare a small self fabric piece measuring 5.5 by 2.5 cm. On the wrong side, fold up the lower edge of the longer side by 0.5 cm. Fold it in half with the right sides together, aligning the ends, and sew with a 0.5 cm seam allowance. Press the seam allowance you just made open. Insert the zipper end fabric over the end of the zipper with the folded edge positioned at the top. Position the open seam allowance at about the center of the zipper back side. Stitch 0.5 cm from the end. Turn the fabric right side out. Use an awl or similar tool to tuck in any seam allowance of the zipper end piece so it doesn't stick out. Then, top stitch a straight line at the bottom about 3 mm from the edge. Now it's time to make and attach the facing. The shoulder sections will be joined as shown. With the right sides together, sew each back-facing shoulder to the front-facing shoulder. Press the seam allowances open. Overlock the edge of the neck facings as shown without trimming. Now it's time to join the attached facing to the main body. Turn the bodice right side out, match the edges of the facing and the entire neckline, placing them right sides together. At the center back, Unzip the zipper and unfold the seam allowance to match with the facing. Then sew along with a 1 cm seam allowance, starting from the back center and stitching all the way around the neckline. Clip into the seam allowance at all 4 corners of the square neckline. Cut as close as possible to the stitching line, leaving about 1 mm, and be careful not to cut into the stitching itself. Next, open up the facing and the bodice, turn the seam allowance toward the facing by hand, and apply understitching. Understitching means stitching the facing together with the seam allowance to keep the facing from rolling to the outside. Sew a narrow top stitch about 2 mm on the facing side along the seam. Fold the neckline seam allowances at the back center toward the facing, and using a zipper foot, sew as close as possible to the zipper teeth. After sewing, turn the facing over so it lies on the inside of the bodice again. Press the neckline in place. After pressing, zip the zipper back up. Next, fold in both sides of the joined front pleat panels. Then, following the red arrows in the diagram, bring the left front pleat panel over the right one and match the marked points as shown. Secure with pins. Sew a row of straight stitches 0.5 cm from the edge to secure the overlapped pleats in place. Now it's time to sew the yoke and the pleat panels together. Each red arrow shows the notch on the yoke and the pleat line on the pleat panel that should match when joining them. For the center back yoke, there is no notch, so match the center lines instead. Turn the yoke bodice wrong side out. With the neckline facing down, place the pleats panel inside it like one cylinder inside another, matching right sides together along the joining edge. Then, pin the points marked with red arrows in the previous diagram first. Including the notches on the front and back, also match and pin the side seams. If needed, add a few more pins to secure the rest of the edge. Then sew all the way around with a 1 cm seam allowance. Start just next to the center of the zipper, and when sewing over the zipper, reinforce the area by backstitching 2 to 3 times. After sewing, press the seam allowance downwards. To finish the sleeve hem, first press it up 0.5 cm from the inside. Then fold up 0.5 cm once more. After pressing the hem in place, sew all the way around the hem along the center of the hem width to finish it. Repeat the same steps on the other sleeve hem. To finish, top stitch 3 cm away from the neckline all the way around both of the front and back bodice to secure the facing in place. And that's it, you've finished your 88 blouse. For the pattern link and detailed step-by-step illustrated instructions, check out the description box below. If you share your work, tag me on Instagram so I can repost and feature it. Thanks for watching.